Hello, scholars. I'm going to work through the IXL exercise on formatting quotations and dialogue. I think this is a pretty good exercise because it gives you practice in punctuating quotations that you might use in an essay or a dialogue if you're writing a story. In this practice, there are basically two patterns for quotes. The first one is what we're going to call a dialogue quote. A dialogue quote is going to have a dialogue tag in it. Okay, and when we say a dialogue tag, what we mean is any variation of so-and-so said. For example, if I say, hello, said Soon-hee is the dialogue tag. Johnny asked, what's up? Johnny asked is the dialogue tag. My cookies are gone, wailed Lawrence. Wailed Lawrence is a dialogue tag. Now, when you have a dialogue tag, the dialogue tag itself is not a full sentence, right? And typically it's just going to hook onto that quoted material with a comma. But there are a couple different patterns here. We could have a dialogue tag at the beginning of a quote, something like X says, comma, quote. With this pattern, the dialogue tag again leads in with a comma, and then the quote is going to have a capital letter because it's like a sentence within inside of a sentence. And then we're going to have a period at the end, assuming it's a statement rather than a question. And that period is going to tuck inside the quotation marks. Now, if we were doing a quote from an essay or for an essay and we needed a page number, we'd put the parentheses there and then the period would tuck outside the parentheses to show that the citation belonged with the quote. But for this exercise, there are no citations. So periods are always just going to tuck inside. We could also have a dialogue tag at an end of a quote, like, quote, says X. Okay, in this case, the dialogue tag is going to hook on with a comma, again, unless the quote is a question. And the dialogue tag is not going to be capitalized unless you've got a name or something here first. Because again, it's not its own sentence, it's just part of that bigger sentence. And of course, we can finish our sentence with a period, unless it's a question itself, in which case we'll need a question mark. Okay, one other thing we can do with the dialogue tag is to put it right in the middle of a sentence. And whenever we insert something inside of a sentence, we probably need to set it off with paired punctuation. So paired dashes, parentheses, or in this case, paired commas. So I'm going to have the beginning of bit of my quote, comma, the dialogue tag, comma. Again, those are my paired commas. Then I'm just going to pick up with the rest of the quoted material. And I'm not going to capitalize right here with the that because that's just part of that larger sentence, right? So no need for a capital letter. And of course, period will tuck on the inside. Now, we might have a couple variations if we've got, say, a question or an exclamation. Periods are always going to tuck inside, again, unless we've got a citation, but the question mark or the exclamation point could go inside the quotation marks or outside. It just depends on the content of the sentence. In this case, X asked, is that a cookie? The quoted line itself is a question, right? The question mark belongs inside those quotation marks because it belongs with that quoted line. But look at the next example. Did X say, that's a cookie? Well, what X is saying is not a question. The bigger sentence is a question, right? So the question mark is going to go outside those questions. Sorry, blah, blah, blah. So the question mark is going to go outside those quotation marks. Okay, now I said there were two patterns for embedding quotes in this exercise. The first one is the dialogue quote, any variation of so-and-so says. Okay, the second pattern, though, is called, well, we're going to call it anyway, a flow quote. Now, with the flow quote, it's not like you've got so-and-so says, comma, quote, and that quoted material is not going to be like a full sentence within a sentence. Instead, we're usually just taking a couple words or a little piece of that quote, and we're working it really, really smoothly into our sentence. So smoothly that if we said the sentence out loud and you couldn't literally see the quotation marks on the page, you wouldn't even know that we were quoting because there's no pause leading in. Take a look at the example. Johnny explained that he felt like a devastated kitten some days. Again, no pause here, no pause here at the end of the quote. It just feels like it's part of the sentence, worked in super smoothly. Okay, so again, in this exercise, it's either going to be a dialogue quote or a flow quote, and we're going to punctuate accordingly based on which of those patterns we see. Okay, here's my first question. How wonderful it is that nobody need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world, observed Dan Frank. Well, observe Dan Frank is a dialogue tag, right? Which means it needs to hook on with a comma, and it is, so that's good. But there's no need to capitalize it because, again, it's not a sentence within a sentence. It's just a little dialogue tag. So I'm going to lowercase the O, and then everything else is looking good to me. So let's hit submit on that. Would you happen to know why my doctor advised take some extra vitamin C before the surgery? Okay, my doctor advised, well, that's a variation of so-and-so said, right? So I need a comma. And then the quoted material is like a little sentence within a sentence, so I'm going to go ahead and capitalize that. Now, as far as the placement of this question mark, remember it could go inside the quotation marks or outside the quotation marks. It depends whether the bigger sentence is the question or whether the quoted material is the question. Well, in this case, the doctor is not asking a question, he's making a statement. The bigger sentence is the question, right? So question mark doesn't belong inside. Question mark belongs here outside. And everything else is looking good now. As the class period drew to an end, Professor Russo warned, "I recommend taking the time to study for the exam tomorrow." Well, Professor Russo warned is a variation of so-and-so said. That's a dialogue tag, right? So we need to hook on that line of dialogue with a comma. Our I is already capitalized, so that's looking good. And then we come to the end, we've got the period on the outside, we got to tuck that on the inside. There's no citation. Again, here in America, periods tuck inside quotation marks. Dick Polovsky, a character played by Clint Eastwood, memorably quips, "If you want a guarantee, buy a toaster." What a great line, right? Okay, quips is like said. I've got my comma. I've got my capital letter, so that's all looking good. When I come to the end, though, I've got my period outside the quotation marks. I got to tuck it here on the inside. Now I'm good to go. "The trains were running late yesterday," complained Andrew, "but I didn't think they'd be delayed by hours." Okay, it looks like I've got one line of dialogue with the dialogue tag stuck right there in the middle, so I need to use pair of commas. I've got a comma here, but let's pair it with a comma here on the other side of Andrew. Okay, now my be and but is lowercase, which is what I want, right? Because it's not a new sentence. It's just part of that sentence that got started over here. And then it makes sense for the exclamation point to be inside because what Andrew is saying is an exclamation. "The chief business of the American people," said President Calvin Coolidge, "is business." Okay, this looks like the exact same pattern we just saw. We've got a dialogue tag that's right here in the middle of a quote. So I need a comma here, and then I'm going to lowercase this dialogue tag. Again, no need to capitalize it. It's not like a sentence within a sentence. It's just a dialogue tag. I'm going to go over here and lowercase this because, again, it's just part of that bigger sentence. And then I'm just checking my end punctuation. It's tucked inside. So according to President Woodrow Wilson, the original goal of the United States was... Well, that pause doesn't make any sense at all. Okay, we finally have our first quote, flow quote. So this is not like President Woodrow Wilson said, yada, yada, yada. Again, this is just a little piece of what he said, and it's been worked into our sentence, and it should just be blended really smoothly. So I'm going to go ahead and take out this comma, and I'm going to go ahead and lowercase this capital letter T, make it lowercase. And then, of course, I got to tuck my period on the inside. Okay, and let me read it now. According to President Woodrow Wilson, the original goal of the United States was to put the control of the government in the hands of the people. Okay, nice, smooth-sounding sentence. I've got quoted material in there, but it's just been blended right with the sentence. Great example of a flow quote. World-renowned chef Ron Adria once dramatically asserted that it takes an entire life just to know about tomatoes. That is pretty dramatic. Okay, now I do have asserted, but it's not like he asserted, and then you've got the sentence that he said. Again, I've got just a little piece of what he said worked in here into the sentence. So this looks like a flow quote to me. I don't have any punctuation, and that's good. I don't want any, but I do need to lowercase my a because it's not a full sentence within a sentence. Again, it's just a little piece worked in my sentence. And then I've got my period tucked on the inside like it should be. So it looks like we're good to go. If you don't inform the landlord within 30 days, warned Rose, a longtime tenant, you may never get your faucet fixed. Okay, well, I've got warned Rose, so this is back to that dialogue quote pattern. So I've got it hooked on with a comma here. That looks good. Got a lowercase letter here. That looks good. But you're thinking, we need something here, and you're absolutely right. We got to have that comma here. So let's put that comma here. Now I've got period commas around my inserted dialogue tag. And then since this is just a continuation of that sentence, it's not like a brand new sentence, I need to lowercase this y. And then, of course, the period tucks inside. Now, if you start paying attention when you're reading books, you'll see that plenty of times you've got patterns like this where the dialogue is in the middle of the sentence, but you could also have a dialogue tag that was between two sentences, in which case we just put a period here after the dialogue tag and just pick up with the next sentence. That'd be great too. But this exercise doesn't have any examples like that. Again, it's just dialogue tags are inserted inside of a sentence. Okay, let's do a couple more. Among other questions, the gym's intake form asks, "What are your fitness goals?" Okay, well, the form asked, that's definitely a dialogue tag. Let's hook it on with a comma. This is like a sentence within a sentence, so let's capitalize it. And in this case, the question mark is going to make more sense if it's tucked inside, right? Because the actual line of dialogue there is a question. Okay, was Rene Descartes the philosopher who said, "I think, therefore I am"? Well, I've got so-and-so said, right? So let's put that comma in there. I mean, I need to be capitalized regardless, but Since it is a sentence within a sentence, it's like a double need for a capitalization there. Now, as far as placement of this question mark, the philosopher here is not asking a question, he's making a statement, right? So question mark doesn't belong there, belongs with that bigger sentence. And the answer to this question is yes. Only one person is missing, wrote poet Alphonse de Lamartine, and the whole world seems depopulated. Well, I've got a dialogue tag stuck in the middle of a sentence, so I need a pair of commas. Lowercase the dialogue tag. This is lowercase, so that's good. And then I got to get that period tucked inside. In explaining the importance of hard work and determination, American soccer player Mia Hamm said, "No one gets an ironclad guarantee of success." All right, I'm liking the comma. That's a variation of so-and-so said, right? Dialogue tag, capital letter. Period, though, needs to tuck inside. Ernesto struggled to follow his client's directive to retain the original feel of the logo during the redesign. Okay, this is a flow quote, right? It's not so-and-so says, it's just a little piece of the quoted material that's been worked smoothly into that sentence, or at least it should be worked smoothly in. But we've got this comma, which is adding a random pause, so let's get rid of that. Okay, we've already got a lowercase letter, which is what we want for the flow quote. So everything else is looking good. And now it fits really nicely. Ernesto struggled to follow his client's directive to retain the original feel of the logo during the redesign. Again, just reads exactly like it should, like one unbroken sentence. Lincoln marveled that the United States was at once the wonder and admiration of the whole world in 1856, after only 80 years in existence. Okay, so again, we've got a flow quote, right? We wouldn't really want to put a comma after was. That doesn't make sense to have a pause there. We don't have a variation of so-and-so said. Instead, we've got just a little piece of quoted material that's been worked smoothly in, or should be worked smoothly in. So let's get rid of that comma. Let's lowercase the a. Everything else is looking good. President Theodore Roosevelt famously said, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." Okay, well, that's definitely a dialogue tag right there. Let's add our comma. We've got our capital letter. Let's tuck our period to the inside. Okay, and I think I'm going to stop here. So with this exercise, again, read the sentence and say, do I have a flow quote or a dialogue quote? If it's a dialogue quote, just follow those basic patterns. Again, dialogue quote tags typically hook on with a comma. Okay, the line of quoted material is a sentence within a sentence, so that's going to take a capital letter. Periods tuck inside. Okay, question marks and exclamation points could be inside or outside. It just depends on the meaning of the sentence. And it's just those same patterns repeated. If it's a flow quote, then we don't need a comma, we don't need a colon, we just need a couple pieces from that quoted material worked smoothly into the sentence. And we're going to keep those letters lowercase because they're blended with the sentence, not like a sentence within a sentence. And that's it.